Welcome back to the Scarlet Faithful podcast. I'm Aaron Brightman, and to start things off, as always, we are sponsored once again by Knights of the Raritan, the Rutgers NIL Collective. Click on the link to subscribe to their free newsletter in the description of this episode, helping Rutgers student athletes with NIL. And today, wanted to focus on Rutgers football recruiting, welcoming back David Anderson to give his thoughts on the most recent editions of the 2025 class for Rutgers football. And let's start with the big news from the other day. Rutgers flipping four-star linebacker DJ McClary from Penn State, an in-state kid. Obviously a huge win for multiple reasons. David, your initial thoughts on Rutgers adding DJ McClary to the 25 class?
Sure. So I would definitely say that this is one of those ones that there's a big impact both inside the program as well as outside the program, because anytime you can take a prospect who is currently committed. I mean, I know Jalen Matthews was previously committed to Penn State, but he had reopened his recruitment. McClary, right on Penn State's radar, definitely a take, pretty much can go wherever he wants at this point, and he decided to flip from Penn State to Rutgers. Now, we know that there was a coaching change. Manny Diaz, former coach of Miami, has moved from Penn State's defensive coordinator to the Duke Blue Devils, which was a huge factor in this. But you got to remember that we know that, but the perception of people who are farther away outside the program, they're not going to know a lot of those nuances. They might not know that the connection to Ike Holmes, the former defensive tackle for Rutgers during Schiano, and I believe he completed his career with Kyle Flood's regime. So we know these things. But even then, so outside the program, people probably don't even know. Inside the program, it's still a pretty big win because, I mean, just look at all the times where Rutgers didn't get a younger brother of a guy who there was currently on the roster. So they had gotten Matt Alimo, his brother ended up going elsewhere. They got Desmond and his brother ends up going elsewhere. And then he transferred and didn't come to Rutgers and went to, obviously, Ohio State. But it's obviously a big win because the perception is like, if you can't sell your own family members on this vision, it's a lot harder. So it's clearly Rutgers in a position where they have this cohesion internally, and they're able to make a play that makes a splash both inside the program as well as outside the program. So from a perception standpoint, that's the first part. The second part is just the player. And I was trying to think of when the last time Rutgers had an inside linebacker who was a true thumper, just had that gravitas in the middle of the defense. I'm not trying to take anything away from Tyrene Powell, Mo Toure, who are good players, but they're not true inside linebackers that are just going sideline to sideline making plays. The last guy who really did that was Steve Longa, who ended up playing middle linebacker, and then later he played on the outside to be more of a playmaker. But when he was playing middle linebacker, he was able to be a threat all the time in the pass rush, as well as covering backs coming out of the to the side in the flats, for example. So this is the type of guy that they haven't really had if he hits, and they haven't even really had that many guys. Maybe a Tyshawn Fogg was the only one that was even a recruit at this position per se. And so I think that there's a big opportunity there. And also, not just because of his recruiting rating, but this is a position where the hit rate is much higher because he's already a well-rounded player. He plays a position that is, more consistent from high school to a college level in terms of if you're really good, you're probably going to translate those skills. You don't have to just deal with increased speed and everything like that. So I'm feeling pretty confident that he's a pretty high floor player, and they haven't had a guy in this role in quite some time. So those are my main takeaways as a player, as well as how it fits, the perception of the program.
Fair or unfair, are you getting any Kasim Green vibes from him in terms of his ceiling?
Maybe, but I don't really think he's the same type of player. I mean, Kasim Green, for those of our listeners who are a little bit younger or might not have been around for that, he was a safety that was converted to play outside linebacker. So basically, he was flying around the field. He did a lot more coverage of tight ends, but then he also was just really, really fast off the edge. He was more of a really undersized edge rusher who was amazing at stripping the ball and making plays, which kind of is interesting because Steve Longa was a good middle linebacker, but then they decided, hey, let's try to play him more in that Kasim Green role to try to make more plays on the perimeter, kind of like Olakunle Fatukasi did more recently. So, I mean, could he be as effective as a defensive linebacker? as Green? Yes, though I would think you're going to try to keep him more in the middle of the field. He does a good job of avoiding blocks and like fighting his way through traffic, whereas Green's job was never to fight through traffic. It was really to attack from the perimeter. And so, yeah, I mean, I think ceiling-wise similar, but it's not going to be the same type of player that fans should expect.
And just in terms of the vision of the program and how some of these new pieces fit, how do you see in terms of Kanan Edwards from Georgia, the edge rusher, and what he can bring to the program?
So especially kind of parlaying what we're going to see in terms of potentially having more like strength in the interior of the linebacking core, it should allow Rutgers to do two things. One is they're just loading up on edge rushers, right? Because they're trying to figure out how to generate pressure from their front four so they don't need to blitz their linebackers. And Rutgers has added a lot of defensive ends in this class. Some guys may end up elsewhere. Like, for example, Gurman, he might be on the offensive side. But even without, they still have like 5 or 6 guys who could play defensive end in this class. And when you look at Edwards, he is a little bit more of a finished product at the high school level than Kamoko Toure. I mean, if we remember Kamoko Toure, some people are comparing him. I think he's probably a little taller, but he didn't even have junior year film because he didn't play until his senior year of high school. So I was pleasantly surprised by how much further along I think Edwards is with his development. I thought he played pretty well in what I saw. Obviously, we didn't see every single play, so perhaps we're just seeing the highlights. But the highlights are pretty good, pretty physical. He likes the contact. Again, if we're comparing him and contrasting him with Toure, a Kamoko Toure, that is, Toure more relied on keeping himself clean and using a lot of bend to get around the perimeter, whereas Edwards has pretty good power. He will deliver a bull rush more than you would think based on how athletic he is. He also does a decent job of fighting through traffic. He likes to hit people even when he's on the offensive side of the ball. So I think his skills are a little bit more refined than we may have seen from other raw players in the past, but he still fits that mold of a guy who should be able to bring pressure as an edge rusher if in a 4-man front. One of the things I was looking at this week, just kind of on the side while I was multitasking, I was rewatching the Rutgers game against Maryland last year in the season finale compared to the Rutgers bowl game against North Carolina State when they had Russell Wilson as their quarterback. And the reason I was interested in that is I was trying to figure out like how far along is this pass rush compared to Schiano's first regime in terms of getting pressure with 4. And Rutgers did a decent job at times. I mean, Maryland was keeping max protection in several times, which kind of thwarted the like Wesley Bailey and Aaron Lewis weren't defeating double teams to get to the quarterback. But then eventually they were kind of getting around, but then Talia Tagovailoa was able to kind of break the pocket. So he was able to have success, whereas Russell Wilson, when I rewatched that bowl game, when he didn't roll out, he was under heavy pressure. So they basically had to run plays where he was specifically rolling the pocket. So Rutgers, really the next step is to be able to get pressure with 4 and be able to force offenses into dictating what you want them to do, which is they have to roll the pocket, they have to shrink the field. Whereas Tagovailoa last year, he had the entire field at his disposal to either roll left, roll right, sometimes step up, find backs to generate big plays. So I think Rutgers needs a little bit more to be able to kind of dictate the terms of what an offense does with their front 4 so that they don't have to blitz. And they brought in a lot of guys, including Edwards, who may be able to do that in the coming years.
Great points there. And Rutgers really loading up on the secondary in this class. The latest 2, Caleb Singleton and Jakarian Kenan, 2 cornerbacks. What do you see from them, and how does that kind of fit into what Joe Harris-Simiak and Schiano envision with the defense moving forward in the future?
So kind of continuing this theme of the defense of like what they're trying to do. I mean, if you can get pressure with 4, you don't need your defensive backs to be as good. But if they are able to bring a variety of skill sets, and I really see, even though both players are listed at similar heights and weights, I really view Kenan, he more reminds me of that smaller, compact, not as short as Christian Izien, but a guy who really does it all for his team offensively, defensively. He's not like amazing in terms of his catch radius, but he does a good job of adjusting his body and making plays on the ball to make interceptions, or when he's playing offense, just making plays, receiving the ball. I really think that he looks like he's further along in his development. I'm really would be shocked if he's actually 6'1", because he just plays with this quickness and acceleration that usually is smaller players. But I really like when you bring in a guy like that, who's kind of a do-it-all person for his team, as well as someone like Singleton. And I see a guy who's kind of that taller, athletic build. He's got a pretty high ceiling. Some of his technique really could use some refinement. Sometimes he turns his head and needs to flip it back around. He's got pretty good instinct to swat at the ball or know when a receiver is trying to secure the catch. But he's a type of guy where there's a lot of guys like his mold that don't work out, but the ones that do work out usually end up being NFL players. Your Bless Austins, your Marcus Coopers, your guys like that. So I think there's a pretty high floor there, but he also, if he doesn't improve his skills or he doesn't end up having the same speed that he needs to play those receivers, I think it's the Rutgers in a position to take some of these, high ceiling, potentially low floor players, because they've done enough at the position. They have a strong enough position group now that they can afford to be a little bit risky to try to get some of that top end talent. And like we've seen in the past, I mean, getting NFL players helps sell your vision and your staff's ability to develop players that they need to do more of that at this point in time.
Yeah, and Singleton, for example, had a lot of high-level offers. He was, a Florida lean at one point. He visited there very recently. So even if it is someone that maybe on paper isn't a guarantee to work out, he obviously has a lot of interest individually and adds overall. And I think one thing that was notable in this class so far is how many track guys they've added, how many speed athletes just in general they've added to that secondary. Is really a key development, I think.
Yeah, I think I've said this on a previous podcast, but really the only position that I think your 40 time matters is defensive back. They have to be faster in the defensive backfield. They're going to be facing a lot of passing attacks. I'm not saying their guys aren't good, but you want Flip Dixon to be one of the slower people in your secondary, because other guys are flying around the field running all over the place. Right. And so I feel like that's where there's always a risk that your defensive backs aren't fast enough. Now, of course, we know that track speed isn't everything. We can look back at that. I think it was the 1995 Rutgers defensive backfield, which got torched so many times that season, even though I think that their defensive backfield was basically like a 4x100 or a 4x400 relay team that was winning, Big East meets. So just because you have track speed is great, but it's definitely helps when you have good players mixing them in with fast players. You're going to get a product that is, possibly greater than the sum of its parts when you put all these different pieces together. And having faster guys can never really hurt, as long as you have the strength and conditioning program to make sure you don't put too much weight on them, as well as you're teaching them skills so they're not fully relying only on their.
Yeah, and if you're listening to this podcast and didn't think we'd go back to the Doug Graber era, then you haven't listened to us much before. But in terms of running back, John Forster, obviously a huge add. I had spoken about with this class. Right now, they're tracking at their highest player grade average in modern history. They're at 87.77, and I had said if they can flip DJ McClary, if they could add running back John Forster, who they now have added as well from St. Joe's, that this class would really be at a higher level than in years past. What are your thoughts on Forster and just overall, just what that means to the talent level that this class is able to bring to the program as of right now?
Well, you can look at Forster, the running back / potentially slot receiver, and on one hand, and from that regard, I think that they have a pretty busy running back room now. Especially with the 3 true freshmen for this upcoming season that are highly rated. I think that, of the group, maybe Winovich is the only one who's really potentially a bell cow. So I don't think you necessarily need that. I think that, what Forster brings you is that explosive play, receiving, just get the ball in his hands and see what happens. Really, for Rutgers fans, just in this past year when they faced Indiana, they had Jalen Lucas. They did try to get them the ball in a variety of ways. And, he was so good at that he's now a member of the Florida State Seminoles, which is a different conference, but a team that was undefeated last year in the regular season. And so clearly those players are in demand for high level programs. But then on the flip side, you saw how Indiana, without a wide ranging skill on their offense, just force feeding a guy like that is not the solution. You really need other players that can kind of be the core of your offense. And then you can use the guy kind of as a Swiss Army knife, like we saw them only really ever do with, for example, Janarian Grant in recent history. But that's the type of guy where he can add a lot. He doesn't have to play every down, but if you can get him keep him fresh, get them the ball in space, he can make plays, those chunk plays that make it so that your offense doesn't need to have 10, 12, 15 play drives to move the ball all the way down the field like we saw last season. I mean, Rutgers did a decent job several times having those long drives, but you can't rely on that all the time. I mean, that first game against Northwestern, we kind of were like impressed because they occupied the entire first quarter on 2 drives, but you can't rely on that all the time. And so getting a guy who can make those chunk plays, who has that upside, you've seen it. The other reason that I think it's a huge get is, I mean, when you look at the times that, for example, the Titan like Ohio State has fallen in recent years, it's because the other team had like Purdue having Rondell Moore, a guy who's just short, powerful, and can make plays after the catch. It's almost indefensible once he gets it going. If you can, if you have to stop other people. And so for Rutgers really to spring those upsets, these are the type of guys that they need on their roster. Now, he might not necessarily help you win those toss-up games as much. Like he will help, but it's a bigger difference in terms of having that high upside to just have a game where he just goes off for 200 receiving yards, and the defense just can't stop him, and you might spring that type of upset. So I look at it more of him as an offensive weapon than as a pure running back because of his skill set. And they shouldn't need him to tote the rock 35 times between the tackles. Like, that's not the best use of his skills, and that's not where they should need because of the other guys they have added in recent years at that position.
Great points, and obviously a lot of reason for excitement with the 2025 class with how they're trending right now. 28 commits as of right now, going into July 4th week. And just in terms of how many spots we'll see, there's no limits anymore. So, with so many, there's over 40 players in their final year of eligibility on the roster. You have to imagine they'll continue to add to the class a little bit while also leaving room through the transfer portal. I guess my last question, and any closing thoughts you have, is there any position group that you would like to see them add to, regardless of who is close to committing right now? Just any position group you think maybe needs a little bit more in this current cycle, and any closing thoughts you have on the current state of the class?
Well, I mean, I think that in terms of numbers, there's probably going to be a little bit of attrition just because there's so many guys. Like, I would expect some of these guys to decommit at some point, either to go to a bigger time program, or maybe the team is struggling or whatever. I think we need to keep in mind, we talked about how you want to have people committed. So if the team hits a rough stretch, you're less likely to have decommitments if you can right the ship. However, the more of these top end prospects you add, the flight risks are higher because they're going to have more options. Like a mid 3-star prospect in the middle of the season, the way recruiting works now, like, he's not going to have as many potential landing spots. But now that you have some of these high 3-star, borderline 4, or even actual 4-star by consensus recruiting services, those are the type of guys who they're going to be able to find another home. So, like, don't panic. I mean, Rutgers has a pretty good core of their class, regardless of what happens probably in this upcoming season. Just keep in mind that this could change, that we might see a couple of changes. Obviously, again, these guys who are 4-stars, they have a lot of opportunities. So a lot of things can happen with them. Hopefully Rutgers has a great season, keeps them in the fold. In terms of actual positions, I mean, normally I would say defensive end, but they've got so many. I mean, I'm just not sure on that position. Wide receiver, they've got so many. I would say offensive tackle, you can never have enough guys for that. And if you have 4 offensive tackles who are good, you can move one of them into guard usually. Like, there's rarely a time where you have too many. I would say, sure, corner, defensive back. You can never have enough cornerbacks. But this is where we're kind of getting to an interesting question about quarterback. I mean, I like Ashenfelder as what he can do, but if a position opens up, like a 4 or 5-star guy comes available late, I mean, you probably got to consider it, even with Surace in the fold. a Johnny Shepard now being your number 2 quarterback, like this may be a time where you might just have to bite the bullet and see, might impact the locker room a little bit, but you might have to take that opportunity, whether it comes in the transfer portal or in high school recruiting. So normally I would say, you want to load up on those corners, DEs, and receivers, tackles. But other than offensive tackle, I mean, sure, you can add a tight end, but I mean, I think that the main thing is just getting good players regardless of position at this point, because I think they've done a lot. I mean, obviously, I think they got the most commits in the country at this point. So really the focus for me isn't recruiting. The focus for me now is making sure they have a good season on the field in 2024.
Yeah, what we've talked about before. I mean, you increase the talent level, you increase the competition level. So, and someone like Surace has been in football his whole life. I mean, I'm sure if they do have the opportunity to add another quarterback along with Ashenfelder, you have to increase the talent level. You have to increase your depth, and that thus increase competition, which can only make the program and the team better. So, totally agree with you there. As always, David Anderson, thanks so much for all your insight. We'll have plenty more this summer to preview the 24 season and 24 team ahead. But thank you so much for listening and watching once again here at the Scarlet Faithful.